Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are so happy to have you with us, and we are so happy to have a great panel of speakers to talk about the cookie countdown. This is the second webinar in our series on the cookie countdown, and why we're doing this. Adipex is a AdOps consultancy. We work for a few hundred publishers, and it's our job to make sure that their monetization is always safe and the best that it possibly can be. And the crumbling cookie it's a big thing. It's probably one of the biggest things that we've seen in the industry. And we just wanted to be a part of the conversation and keep the conversation going. I would say we've seen the cookie crumbling for many years now, but it's even more imminent upon us now that Google has made the Chrome announcement. And we just feel like we wanted to create this conversation in a platform where advertisers and publishers could talk about what they need, what they're seeing, and talk about testing together. So the first in the series was from the advertiser perspective. And today we're going to approach solutions and opportunities from more from the publisher perspective. So we have Jonathan Chevitz as our moderator, and I will hand it over to him as soon as I do a little housekeeping. So if you get dropped from the session, use the same link from your email to rejoin. We do have closed captioning, just press CC at the bottom. If you have any tech issues, just contact us through the chat box. And we want to have fun. So please, we're informally talking amongst ourselves, and we'd love for you to join the conversation. So if you have questions, please add them to the chat box. And with no further ado, I will now pass the mic over to Jonathan Chevitz.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. We appreciate your attendance. As Deborah said, we're focusing on the cookie countdown, and we have 225 days left before the cookie disappears forever. And we have a great group of panelists today who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. But I'm Jonathan Chavitz. I actually spend my time doing two things. I have a consultancy that works with publishers and advertisers developing strategies to respond to the deprecation of the third-party cookie. And I have a lead generation company called Growth Code that works primarily with B2B marketers, helping them identify leads in market. So with that, I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Amanda, could you begin?
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Benz, RVP of Customer Success at PubMatic. I've been with PubMatic for a little over 6 years now, and I work with our publisher partners on their overall programmatic monetization strategy. So in areas around identity, audience extension, as well as wrapper management. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. Trip?
Thanks, Jonathan. Trip Foster here. I am SVP of Partnerships at InfoSum. Been at the company for a couple of years and spent the last 20 some odd years in the sort of MarTech ecosystem. My job is basically to spend time with media owners across the globe, understand what their current thinking is, and kind of the direction of travel for their initiatives. So really eager to engage with this group on the subject matter, because I hear it quite often, and there's a lot to discuss.
Great, thank you. Nathan?
Hi, I'm Nathan Bell. I'm SVP of Data and Analytics at Digital Trends Media Group. We are a portfolio of brands that are focused on guiding humankind through an increasingly complex digital world. Our flagship brand is digitaltrends.com, where we focus on consumer electronics and product reviews. I've been here almost 13 years, and I have been leading the charge for our data strategy and our response to the deprecation of the third-party cookie.
Great, thank you. And Deborah, will you rejoin us now? So to kind of kick this off, let's start with just kind of where we are, right? So as I said, 225 days before Chrome gets rid of the cookie. A couple of statistics worth noting. According to a recent study by McKinsey, publishers are at risk of losing $10 billion in revenue, annual revenue, based upon the deprecation of the third-party cookie, and that $19.7 billion was spent on audience data in 2019. So we're dealing with big market, big risk. So my first question is kind of where do we think the state of preparedness is in terms of this coming, and in particular from the publisher perspective? And Amanda, I'll ask you to start with that.
Hey, thanks. So I talk to publishers every day in my role at PubMatic, and from what I hear, it's really across the board. We have a lot of publishers that are very leaned into identity, and they are well underway on their identity strategy. They're actively testing identity partners and getting learnings. And then I'd say the next bucket is really just starting to understand, you know, who all the players are, starting to think about it, starting to know that they've got to figure out something. And then we do have some of those publishers that just are going to take the wait and see approach, and not as many, but just not really ready to lean into any identity solution just yet, not making any plans to do any testing. And for that group of publishers, you know, those are the ones that I'm the most concerned about, because for most of the publishers that we work with, the Chrome browser is about 60% of their traffic and accounts for 80% of their revenue. So when the cookie does go away, that's going to have a big implication on their revenue. And then I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but Google also released a study about a year and a half ago of the top global 500 programmatic publishers. And they estimate that when the cookie does go away, that those publishers could lose up to 50% of their revenue. And so that's a big number. And it's, you know, something that publishers need to think about and take this very seriously. And, you know, I would just encourage publishers, you know, if you're in that latter bucket where you're going to take the wait and see approach, to not do that. I'd advise you to start testing now. And, you know, in this quarter, Q3, don't put this off till Q4 when we're in the midst of holiday planning and, you know, we have code freezes. Just really start to take advantage of, you know, the opportunities that you have in front of you right now.
Nathan, as a publisher coming from DTMG, you know, what have you guys been doing, and where do you see, I'm sure you talk to other publishers, where do you see the market?
Well, I think for us specifically, we saw this, I think what was announced 2 years ago. And what we decided to do was kind of go on a fact-finding discovery mission and learning all we could about what really was going on in the ecosystem, what it meant. I think there was a lot of people that were in the publishing world that were kind of paralyzed a little bit, didn't quite understand what was going on, and maybe thought, in my mind, maybe thought Google would just come out with their own solution. But we didn't want to wait and see. You know, that approach wasn't going to be our strategy. So we decided to solve for ourselves, and kind of going down that path. I was lucky to have, you know, the support from the board and the ELT early on to make those investments, which I definitely recommend any publisher that's looking at this right now, getting that top-down support immediately, and explaining to the folks within your internal organization what's at risk. As you just mentioned, 10 billion. What revenue lines are at risk, programmatically, direct, specifically even commerce, depending on how you're set up. And then look at the resources like we did. We looked at what we had available internally, what we needed. Was there partners that could provide what we needed? Did we feel like our core strength was in data science or data engineering? You know, did we have the right engineering and development team to tackle some of the kind of heavy lifting that we saw that was required, whether it was integrating with pre-bid or picking an identity solution or provider? So, you know, it took a lot of time. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It was, you know, a good 2 years of work that we've already put in, and, you know, our solution ended up being solving for ourselves, but creating a first-party data platform that we could then provide for other publishers and advertisers.
Great. And Trip, you, we'll talk a little bit more about privacy and data clean rooms in a moment, but just as an intermediary who's dealing with this and obviously talking to publishers, how do you see the market kind of in terms of its preparedness?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I'd just say less intermediary, more infrastructure play for InfoSum. We're sort of a SaaS-based set of tools that publishers and media owners and brands can use to collaborate. But the thing I'd like to sort of pick at is, you know, the continuum of preparedness. I would say that, like, Nathan is definitely leaned in, has been for a while. Obviously, we're really proud of the work we're doing with the digital trends. But I would say the state of preparedness is kind of along with what Amanda was saying, like I am worried that there are a lot of media owners who are just starting to pull the string now, because I do feel that we are at a point where we're down to a number of days. It's not years now, and I would say that I think there are a lot of very rational approaches. There's some that are just a portfolio of strategies. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do 7 different things. We're going to try them all, throw it at the wall, see what sticks. I'm glad people are experimenting, because that to me says they're being proactive. That to me says that they're going to take a decision that's based on what's best for their audience and what's best for their brands. What worries me is the folks that are going to wait to be told what to do by a set of vendors or a single vendor. That's where we get to that place where we don't have a leg to stand on and complain about where the market is if we're not taking these decisions into our own hands and doing this stuff ourselves. And I think I just encourage every publisher that I'm either speaking with on a daily basis or those that are attending this webinar, really have an idea of where you want to go and where you want to be, and select the vendors and the tools that you use based on that. Don't wait. Definitely don't wait, and be proactive here.
Great.
Trip, I want to kind of add on to what you just said. I feel like there's a lot of vendors that have it in their best interest to try to keep things as status quo and continue, their ad tax, so to speak. And they might be, to your point, misleading to the publishers. Hey, follow me. I've got the solution. I've got the path, and it's just going to perpetuate, the publishers giving away their power, their data, and perpetuating the old ecosystem, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Deborah, I mean, one of the things that I've witnessed over the last year, both Pubmatic and Adipex, as well as others, are trying to create tools that allow publishers to step in a little bit with a little less friction. So maybe you can kind of talk about what you're seeing there. You're on mute, Deborah.
Sorry. First of all, I agree with the group that, everywhere from we're going to be proactive, and Nathan, congratulations, 2 years ago is quite impressive, to wait and see. There's everyone on the spectrum out there, but this is constant change is constant in our industry, right? But every change, and the more disruptive it is, the bigger the opportunity is on the other side. So we took the approach. GDPR was a great lesson. Isn't this kind of like GDPR repeating itself? CPMs go away. We see the data. We saw the data with Firefox, Mozilla going away. We see the CPM differences. We see the 3 to 15x difference in CPMs on non-personalized ads versus personalized ads. So we have, similar to Pubmatic, we've started testing, and we started our first identity solution that we employed was LiveRamp, and they were really good at providing the data, and the data was so promising that it just opened our eyes to, there will be, as we've said before, not one solution, there'll be many. Obviously, the identity solution is key. And there are so many identity providers out there right now, but we are waiting when we see a mask behind one of them. But just to give you an idea, with the LiveRamp, they were able to measure, and we see 60x on the CPM difference between what they're able to cookie and monetize with the cookie solution. Imagine when we get first-party data into the equation as well. So again, there are just so many opportunities that, again, why we keep this conversation going, so that we're part of the conversation and that we're working together, because the solution, any solution, is daunting for any single publisher, I think. And the best way to attack this and to come out ahead on the other side is to group together, have the conversations, have the tests. Don't test one, test many, measure, test again.
Great. So we've thrown around the word identity now a few times, and I think there's a different degree of understanding about that term and what it means. And when we talk about identity, universal identities, ranging from a LiveRamp to a Trade Desk ID to a Lotame ID to Oracle ID. We have many, you said, IDs out there. Trip, actually, would you just give a very quick primer on kind of what is a data clean room, and then talk about first-party data as an identity tool versus some of these open identity tools, and then we'll get everyone to comment on that. And just by the way, please do ask questions as we're going. And we've got one here, which I'll get back to in a moment. But in terms of our audience, please come in with questions, and we'll address them during the conversation.
So yeah, sure. Just the Cliff's notes on clean rooms. For those who don't know, it's essentially an environment where two firms or multiple firms can collaborate on sort of an understanding of what the potential is between, let's say, an audience file and a CRM file or a CDP file. The reason why clean rooms are so important right now is because when you rip the third-party cookie out, sorry, just make sure, third-party cookie here, we take that out of the ecosystem. That's the connectivity layer that exists today that allows the brand and the agency and the media owner to all connect. When you remove that you're sort of left with this need to figure out how to connect different data sets and different potential collaborations. A clean room allows, brand X to clean room their data with media publisher Y. They can understand the sort of value of collaborating together. Now, the distinction between kind of that concept and where InfoSum approaches it, I'll just dive into that really quickly, which is that most other solutions on the market are requiring a brand or a media owner to ship data into a third-party data lake. We believe that with the governance protocols in place and with InfoSec in place, and folks like the lawyers at Digital Trends and other media owners, the idea of shipping data that has been leaking into the ecosystem for the last 10 or 15 years, shipping that into a third-party data lake is sort of repeating the mistakes of the past. And so what InfoSum does is basically give a owned and controlled environment inside the media owner stack, inside the brand stack, where the data can live and remain, and we can still understand the value of the intersection and the connectivity between data without ever having shared it. So that's the kind of primer on clean rooms. In terms of your question about identity writ large, I think, as Jonathan, you said, there's two types of identity. We have the data and the identity that the media owner own and the brand own, and just consider that, for the sake of argument, the PII and the CRM or the CDP, or the audience sort of file, if you will. And that's things like emails and maids and actually immutable first-party identifiers and whatever attribute information you have about each one of those individuals. I think the spines, you think about those, are essentially like that mapping table that understands the relationship between a hashed ID or a plain text ID and a maid and a phone number and an IP address and address. And those are in some place clearinghouses where firms have been sort of like signing up with an identity spine to do the resolution versus keeping that data in your control, so you can actually do the resolution yourself against the brand CRM, et cetera. I hope that made sense. If there are any questions, please feel free.
Well, one of the questions that just came in from Tara was, what's the difference between a clean room and second-party data? Haven't we been doing this for years already, or is it different?
I think second-party data, you still have a situation. If it's a second party, you still have the issue of moving data, right? So if Ford wanted to collaborate with one of its manufacturing partners, the manufacturing partner is still going to have to ship that into an environment where they can collaborate with Ford, and where I think the distinction lies is there is, with a third-party environment, there's still that connectivity using the third-party cookie. With that gone, we are going to see a lot more, Tara, to your point, we're going to see a lot more of that collaboration in between partners. That is more of a second-party collaboration. I just think we're seeing a movement, whether it be kicked off with GDPR and followed up with CPRA and CCPA. You're going to see a movement where the actual movement of data to do those collaborations is going to be definitely looked at in a very strong way by governance protocols, et cetera. So we just have to think about
So
how
you
we're going to do
kind
that.
of- So the clean rooms solve for this idea of first-party data comparisons, both in terms of media activation, in terms of analytics and other things. And then we have all of the universal IDs out there, right? And both a question and a comment. So Lindsay made the comment that LiveRamp is not an open ID. And I use the term it's salted, right? That's unique to the publisher LiveRamp combination or the brand LiveRamp combination and that user versus a more open ID. So Amanda, where are you seeing kind of both the uptake and the utilization? Uptake meaning people signing up for, utilization meaning they're actually monetizing against the salted IDs versus the more open IDs.
Sure. Yeah, with all of the IDs that are in market today, we really see this as an opportunity for publishers to take control and really figure out a great addressability strategy that's going to work for them and that's going to work for their buyers. And so we recommend that publishers talk to their buyers, understand which IDs they plan to test and which ones are going to be most important to them, and make sure that they have an integration and a pathway into that ID. And we want to make that as easy as possible for publishers to test all the IDs that are in market. And so last February, we rolled out a solution called Identity Hub. It's a really smart solution that just allows publishers to easily implement and test any of the leading ID partners in market today. So partners like LiveRamp, Trade Desk, Criteo. We have about 17 partners that are live there right now, and they span cookie solutions, probabilistic solutions, deterministic solutions, and it's all based on pre-bid. And so essentially all the publisher has to do is put this pre-bid code on page, and once that's on page, they can implement any ID they want, and they can test, see which ones are providing the most lift for them. For the most part, we see no issue with adding multiple IDs. Publishers always will see a lift in eCPM and fill rate, and it's really win-win for the publisher as well as for the advertiser, because it just makes it easier for them to execute PMPs, and we've seen a lot of success with it. And I just, it gives publishers a tool that can easily, they can add all these IDs on, they can test them. It's a free tool, there's no cost for it. And there's also no contract needed as long as you're an existing PubMatic customer. So it really reduces all the friction, just makes it very simple for publishers to get their foot in the door and really figure out their identity strategy.
Great. And Nathan, Trevor asked from the pub side, how are you guys thinking about betting on UIDs versus building, owning your first party data sets?
I think that's a good question. And back to what Amanda was saying, I think for us, it's important, and for publishers listening, it's important you don't bet on one horse, so to speak, in the game. And we don't know who's going to win this, which IDs are going to be most prevalent. And kind of how we built our data platform, which we call Report AI, is to be agnostic to technology and IDs, and to build those relationships directly with the predominant IDs in the game, whether they be salted or not. Though I do think that there's some limitations for certain publishers on LiveRamp and their solution, depending on how many authenticated users they have. But I think the way I look at this too, with as we talk about pre-bid here, I think it's critical that publishers all get on pre-bid as soon as possible. I know there's a level of effort required from engineering, and there's a lot of people here, there's smaller publishers that maybe don't have those resources. And I know there's some actually folks on this call right here that probably could help those publishers. I do think the Identity Hub is a brilliant solution. If you don't have your own team and you can't go out and create direct relationships with all the identity providers, going to somebody like Identity Hub is going to be your quick, easy button, as I call it, to start matching and testing against those IDs. And really, it's trying to unlock where all the revenue's at, because you don't know where your brands and agencies are playing and what sandboxes and what IDs and ecosystems that they're going to pick as well. So the idea being as many as possible is going to get you the most revenue and lift.
Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate that.
Deborah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I just to go back, I mean, PubMatic, we've been partners with PubMatic since day one, so close to a decade, and worked very closely with them. And we have, as I said before, adopted a very similar approach and made sure, although we're not using their solution, that we are tied into their solution. And, no contract involved for our publishers to be in the pool. So we have, like I said, we've seen uplifts for our publishers, but I also find it interesting. I hope this is a fact that it's okay to share, Amanda, but we've noticed over the past year in working with with PubMatic and making sure that, there is this connection and seeing the PMPs that must be plugged in behind them over the nearly 10 years that we've been working with PubMatic, the share of voice across our pool of publishers has been pretty constant. It has doubled in the past year. So it's obviously a strategy that is working, not only for PubMatic, but for our publishers as well. So yeah,
Absolutely.
agnostic, but it works.
Glad to hear that. And yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention is that even if you're using Identity Hub or you've built your own, all the IDs, they benefit all of your bidders that you have in your wrapper or in everyone in your pre-bid stack. So it really lifts everyone up. So you're going to see benefit across the board. Yep.
So, I mean, one of the things that I question is we have these different IDs ranging from what I'll call kind of a third-party cookie ID that is kind of a substitution for that, all the way to the authenticated ID of Trade Desk 2.0, as well as ATS from LiveRamp. So we kind of have this continuum, some more deterministic, some more probabilistic. Do we think that all of these are actually legal under CCPA and CPRA? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I can just render kind of what we talk about here at InfoSum, which is we have no idea. We definitely have some suspicions. As I said before, I mean, just selfishly to the banner behind me, I like where we're sitting because we provide the media owner and the brand with a degree of agnosticity, right? It doesn't matter what that key ultimately is or what we arrive at. Tomorrow, it could be trusted ID. It could be illegal in 18 months and we could be on to something else, but we want to provide the brand and the media owner the ultimate flexibility to build the connectivity between them and their counterparties to trade in a way that we're sort of agnostic to what that key ends up being. So I think for me to sort of say I have an idea, I definitely, I mean, there's some stuff that just smells like it's going to get chased out. If you look across the pond where InfoSum was born in the UK, you can already see what's happening there, and you can sort of see the state of the sort of identity spines and what they're doing over there. So there's some hints to what's going to happen here. I suspect it's going to take longer to get there over here than it did over there.
Amanda, when you through Identity Hub, when you are looking at these authenticated solutions, I think one of the big challenges for publishers is that their authenticated traffic is relatively small. So whether it's 2% or 10%, it's rare to see people that have 50 or 80 or 100% login rate, unless you're a media property like Channel 4 in the UK, where everyone has to log in order to access. So, two questions here. One, what are the CPMs like for that type of authenticated traffic relative to other IDs? So is it actually better? And two, what percentages of authenticated traffic are you seeing amongst your publishers?
So for our publishers, they all have varying percentages of logged in users or authenticated traffic. And, we definitely encourage publishers to start thinking about their authenticated traffic strategy and figuring out ways to collect sign-ons and add more email addresses and just collect that user base, because that's going to be very important over the next few years to continue to grow that. And we really just want to make it easy for publishers to test any of the authenticated solutions, whether it's LiveRamp, Trade Desk, Brightpool, Parable. And so we have made it really easy to do that through Identity Hub. And we've also made it very easy contractually, because since those are authenticated solutions, you do have to have a privacy policy on your site.
I appreciate the friction, but can you just share the spread of percentages of people who are actually logged in?
Yeah, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but what I can tell you though is the majority of publishers do not have a lot of logged in users. I would say it's a smaller percentage. And so if you can make it easy to start onboarding all those IDs and testing them out and growing that, we can give you the tools to analyze it. But I don't have those stats off the top of my head.
Fair enough. Deborah, do you have a sense about authenticated traffic across your few hundred publishers?
It's quite small, honestly. And
just so I'm clear, when my sense is that we're talking 2, 3, 4, 5%. That it's when you say quite small, is that the type of number you're talking?
2-3.
Thank you.
And even to get to 10%, of course, we're encouraging them, and we're providing tools and strategies and ideas and pushing them in that direction. But even if you do get to the 10% average, call it 15 because the world evolves a little bit more, that doesn't make up for the 80% revenue loss that Amanda mentioned before that comes from Chrome traffic. So that's why I think probabilistic solutions are also very important for the scale, not just authenticated, but the probabilistic as well. And we're talking a lot about ID, but there are other options out there too around contextual and flocks and everything. But authenticated can never be the end all, I don't think.
Yeah, it's good to have all the different solutions. And then if you are one of the publishers that do not have a lot of logged in users, there's a lot of ideas that LiveRamp or Brightpool or whoever can help you out with to help you build that base, because it will be important, but you need to take a holistic approach and use all of the different solutions.
And
I would take
Nathan, from a publisher perspective, taking all of these solutions, right? So clean rooms and multiple universal IDs and contextual. I know that, as you said, DTMG has stepped in, leaned in significantly, and you have now deployed a contextual solution. You've deployed a few different clean room environments. You've deployed some different universal IDs. What's the level of effort? And again, some of this may have evolved since you began, but what's the level of effort from an organizational perspective to do something like that?
I would say, 1 to 10, it's 8 or 9. Again, like I said, you need support from the ELT and the board, because it will be resource intensive, whether it's money or people or vendors. And it takes time to get that all put together. It's not necessarily easy. I think, we were early on in the clean room, actually, and understanding what that provided us, especially in the privacy compliant world. And I think you're talking about IDs and authenticated, we went down that path and looked at the authenticated solutions, but like Deborah just said, we don't have a lot. Now we're going to deploy, there's a short strategy and a long strategy, right? The long strategy is to deploy, to capture authenticated users and do a value exchange to get them to log in. And there's multiple ways that publishers can do that. That's a long game. That's not going to solve for them come, January, February, what the answer is. And then Google coming out and saying, we're not going to recognize HEMs or emails as a solution in our ecosystem, but hey, look, go check out Flock, go this path too. So for those publishers that are going all in now on email, that rug could also be pulled out from under them. So again, it is about deploying multiple solutions, because it's just still the Wild West, right? We don't know which way it's going to head.
Sorry, Trip, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, kind of echoing that. I think when you get down to kind of like first principles here, I agree with everybody on the panel. Like every publisher needs to go on that journey from unknown to known. That has to happen. You have to capture some form of handshake with your end user. What I would say to Nathan's point is, while that journey occurs, you need to have other things that you're testing and trying and making sure that you've got a good environment for that. But in the end, the immutable identifier in the ecosystem is owned by the publisher and owned by the brand, right? And so that is, we can guess whether the foundations of a certain private identity spine is going to be legal in 6 months or whatever. But in the end, to prepare to lock down the future, just go capture as much authenticated data as you can, because that's your currency. And this is something we kind of joked about on the panel as like a movie cliche, but this is your time as a media owner. This is your time to take back control. We've ceded control to intermediaries for the last 8 to 10 years through the programmatic ecosystem. This cookie going away is not the sky falling in our eyes. This cookie going away is a real opportunity for the media owners across the planet to grab back control of their data, their relationships with brands, the conversation, how strategic they can be. This is really a really interesting and great moment in time with the media owners finally getting their day in the sun here. And I really believe that underpinning all of this is just making sure you understand the journey you're going to take your users on to capture that first party data, and then look at different creative, very privacy first ways to leverage that data to make sure that you can continue to deliver that great experience to your end user.
Great. We have not touched on mobile at all. And obviously, when we talk about value exchange and changes, one of the things that's happened recently, and I'm going to put up a question from Lee Gessing regarding Apple 14.5, iOS 14.5. So we know that one of the other things that, so I certainly believe that there was a huge amount of value that publishers and others gave up by giving their data effectively away for free to third parties who aggregated it and made a lot of money off of third-party cookies. That's going away. Universal IDs maybe are trying to replace that, and maybe those companies are also trying to capture that. But clearly one of the new intermediaries in all of this is Apple, basically iOS as well as Android. And how do you see that playing out, given that they now have control? And Lee's question, the do not track kind of popping up automatically, huge opt-out rates, or actually a lower opt-in rate, I guess would be the better way to do it, because the default has changed. How does mobile play in with these identity conversations and the monetization conversations for publishers? You want to?
I'm happy to jump in if you guys aren't bored of me. I'll give you a kind of an example of, we talked to, publishers. We'll call the range of publishers that we're talking to is the sort of high authenticated publishers. So think about streaming services or CTV providers, and then low authenticated, which is, a publisher that lives in that 2%, 3% of authenticated. When I talk to the platforms that have essentially the sort of obligation to the end user to log in order to access services behind the sort of paywall of the login, many of them are taking that hit, right? They're taking initial 60% hit on that ability to track cross app, et cetera. What I think is there's a couple things that are interesting there. I think we hear that there's like a legal and PR kind of issue at play there when it comes to somebody who owns hundreds of millions of end users, which is just like, what can we do with this email that we've captured as part of our user experience, right? It may just be they need to get over the PR and legal constraints and just say, okay, we are still allowed to email them, right? Like, we have the email, we've captured the login. Let's just get over the fact that that's okay. Like, this is how we manage our relationships with our users. So there's that internal legal PR sort of problem, but I think you'll also see those who have the heavy authenticated users, they're going to start kind of creeping back up. So if you lost 60%, you're going to incrementally over the next 365 days, those folks are smart. They're going to figure out a way to make sure that those folks are coming in and authenticating and saying, yeah, I have to opt in to get my streaming service to work on desktop plus mobile plus iPad, right? So I think there's going to be a clawback of those permissions, and I think a lot of that has to. Before that starts, I think you're gonna see these larger companies that have the authenticated bases, that they just have to solve for the PR and the legal challenges. I think the unauthenticated publishers, in some ways, it doesn't change my position, which is you still need to capture the first party data, because there's certainly, I don't think Apple can prevent them from sending an email newsletter to somebody who they've built a relationship with and who's traveling to their site every day. So I hope that was a helpful response.
Amanda, what are your thoughts?
Right now, from PubMatic's perspective, it's still kind of early days for us, but we do know that it's important to have identifiers for app. And so we are working on a solution for people with a new update that have consented in. There's a few IDs that we'll be able to support in an identity hub type module. So we are looking at that, but we know it's important, but right now we do not have a solution for it, but we're working on something.
And I think, to me, the reality is that the intermediaries or the platforms like Apple and Android are in a position that they're going to change that dynamic and force publishers to just more fully engage with their users to get that consent, get that authentication, or they're not going to be able to do that. And that leads us to the other types of solutions, which are, the contextual solutions and some of the other things. In terms of contextual, Nathan, how are you seeing that play out? You guys obviously have a highly curated audience, very focused on a specific subject matter. How does contextual play into your strategy?
It's incredibly important for us. Our audience is, we have the whole funnel on the purchase and journey and the user journey, but what we have in spades is intent and in-market data, and the contextual segments that, and this is one thing I recommend to publishers that haven't done this, is organize your content and pull out that metadata and make that available in your data layer so that your programmatic partners and direct partners can see contextually what they're buying on your page. That's one other strategy that I think maybe is not talked about enough, but if you don't have a DMP, it's probably time to start talking about using one in order to organize your contextual segments as well. But again, for us, with the amount of intent, when people come to our site, they are already kind of in that mode, that purchase mode. And depending on the type of content, whether it's a product review or a product comparison or sort of a roundup best of type thing, being able to look at that content and, again, ideally knowing who that user is and kind of where they are in that journey, and then surfacing, contextually the right segment to that buyer so they can make in that moment that buying decision. Contextually, I think the opportunity is come back big time, and I think it's big for publishers. If anything, definitely go heavy into the contextual segments right now.
Deborah, are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we look at it as a pyramid, right? At the bottom is contextual, and that's the biggest volume out there. So if you don't have time or resources to create a more, let me just say, we have contextual cohorts, probabilistic, and then authenticated IDs with the higher CPMs at the top. But where are you going to get your biggest bang for the buck is at the bottom of the base. For those that you couldn't capture up at the top, you need, as a minimum, a good contextual strategy in place, because the top layers are not going to capture all of your users.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that people have used third-party data for, third-party cookie-related data for, has been analytics and comparisons, right? We rely upon outside organizations to help us understand where data is coming from and how it relates from one kind of channel to the next. Kunal asked the question, is server-side tagging overcoming the third-party, first-party cookie conflict, or is there an alternative that we can use for data collection? And I think, particularly to the second part of that question, how are people thinking about data collection and in particular analytics and attribution in this post-cookie world? Nathan, how are you guys approaching that?
Well, I think it actually kind of goes back to clean rooms for me, but it's kind of replicating this measurement, insights, and activation, right? Everybody was so used to in the current ecosystem with cookies. How do we replicate that? I think if anybody has had an opportunity to utilize a clean room, you can get even more insights than you typically had before in the old ways of doing it. For us, it's not just insights and measurement, it's being able to then activate against what you're seeing there within that clean room environment. And I know we're going to talk about this a little bit, but there's some tech partners that can help do that for you. But we're actually seeing this as a huge opportunity to get even deeper insights with our brands and partners than we've ever had before. It's definitely more accurate.
And Amanda, for PubMatic, who is playing obviously multiple roles in helping publishers respond to these different issues, how does kind of analytics and attribution play into your strategy?
It's a really important part of our strategy. I mean, we want to be able to give publishers all the tools they need to get the full picture. And one of the ways to do that is reporting and insights on all the identities that you're using and how they're impacting your different browsers and different ad formats. And so analytics is a big piece of what we've built into the product for publishers.
And in terms of, well, this wasn't exactly asked, in terms of brand safety, Do universal IDs play any role in that for people? Anyone? So right now, brand safety, if you think about how brand safety works, most of it is reliant upon either a probabilistic measurement or dropping a cookie and comparing it to some other base. So that cookie side of the solution is going away. It would seem to me that, using first-party data, so a data cleanroom solution or authenticated data in which you have both sides having authenticated traffic, solves some of that, right? Because you now have a known user on both in those instances. But what happens when you don't have a known user, when you have either a probabilistic cookie match, a probabilistic ID match, and how's that going to work in terms of brand safety? How are you going to measure some of these things? Or is it just going to be a measurement kind of on the page, but it's not going to take into account any of the audience data?
Well, I think advertisers need, and we need to provide attribution data, performance data, and it's not just on the publishers, but it is something that we're building in because it's part of, we have to give value to a reader in exchange for an email. We have to give value to an advertiser in exchange for their deals, and they do need to reach people who are not their users, that are not in their CRM. And how do they do that? Through the probabilistic, and how do we show them, maybe the ID provider, maybe the contextual provider as well, in collaboration, we need to show that it worked, the campaign worked, because that's what it's all about, right? Finding the new models that work, and the models that work are measured by numbers. So it's got to be a baked in piece of everybody's data strategy.
So are we going to a new round of trying to normalize data between this ID provider and that ID provider? Is that part of what we're going to be dealing with now?
I
just
think
to solve attribution, and now we get to start all over?
I think so, actually. I think, and it's going to, the better solutions are going to determine the winners.
I think I have a different take on that just because of where I sit. Like, we're an infrastructure play. So we look at measurement as we can do deterministic measurement through InfoSum's infrastructure, right? So you can actually take a media owner and a brand, and we can actually through the InfoSum bunker, which is that decentralized essentially clean room as you described it. We can actually take transactional data without ever having the brand push it back into the media owner to grade their own homework. That could live in a bunker, and we can actually run a query against the sort of list that was activated against, as well as the transactional, who did click buy, sign up for a test drive kind of thing. That can all be sort of run through a deterministic measurement loop, so we can run analyses on incrementality, et cetera. But that said, if what you're keying on at the beginning, to Deborah's point, is a probabilistic identifier, there is going to be a little bit of that loss and that noise based on the sort of probabilistic nature of the identifier versus using a first-party identifier in the first place to key off of the segment that you activate.
Amanda, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think just as far as like brand safety and just transparency, I think like when you're working with identifiers, just make sure that they're CCPA and GDPR compliant. Like that's table stakes. That has to be part of the conversation, and the partner that you're working with is transparent about how they're using your data and how long they're storing it for and things like that. And just having like that open upfront dialogue upfront to be fully transparent.
Okay. So let's just shift, because we're down to about 10 minutes, as we kind of think about what the takeaways are here. And one of the things I heard clearly from Deborah was, start with contextual, because it's it may have the things we talked about, lower CPMs, it's the biggest, broadest piece of your market. And then you kind of go up from there. And we, obviously DMPs, clean rooms, contextual, universal identities. Again, we said, 225 days, and if we take away the third quarter, because people are frozen. We're probably more at 130 days. What are if a publisher has not yet started, kind of what would be your recommendation of the best practices of what order they should be going in? We all don't think it's too late, but they can't necessarily do everything simultaneously. So I'll start with Nathan, given that you've been going through this now for 2 years and you've kind of gotten some scars on your own by being an early mover. Where would you start if you, based upon what you know now?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we definitely learned a lot of lessons on the way for our platform. But one thing we've learned is everything takes twice as long as you think to onboard. So you've got to pick and choose carefully if you only have 6 months left. And I think, again, using that analogy of an easy button or best well-lit path, I think we were saying earlier, is find a partner such as those on this call that can do that heavy lifting for you, because the onboarding work, even just switching a DMP or adding a DMP is the level of effort is hard. And if you're trying to do that on top of onboarding with pre-bid per se, or adding a CDP or onboarding with identity partner, you're not going to get it done in 6 months. There's just no way, depending on how large your data and engineering teams are. So definitely leverage vendors and those partnerships that have already done the hard work for you. That's definitely the quick path if you've got 6 months left.
So that's great, and it actually kind of prompts another question, which I'm going to ask people before I go back to the first question, which is, when you think about technology providers and partners, what are the key questions that you should be asking them? Whether it's a DMP or a clean room or pre-bid partner, what are the questions that you should be asking them first? What are the no-nos? I mean, clearly, how they deal with GDPR and CCPA. Okay, that's a given. But Deborah, what would be next on your list?
I would ask, overall, what is your data strategy? How are you preparing publishers to succeed in the next round? And it's about all the solutions that we're talking about, and employing them as fast as you can and as many as you can. And again, measuring and making sure that they're working for you. And also, there's something that we don't talk about in these conversations, but it's not going to end when the cookie goes away, the third-party cookie goes away, because the whole entire world is going to have a different interaction with every website they go to. We're all used to those consent modules now for GDPR, right? In the beginning, we all thought it was going to send people away from the sites. No, people are just used to clicking. So what is going to be tomorrow and what is going to be the year after, when users start to get used to leaving their email, subscriptions fatigue, maybe they just say, give me ads, I don't want to give you my email. There's a data strategy for today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. And I would really ask that of your tech provider, because it's not going to be set it and forget it, and it's not going to be one fix and we're done.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think I absolutely, that sentiment is key. I think what I would do is I would also say that we need to ask a question before we ask the vendor a question, and that's an internal question, which is, from a privacy and security perspective, are we comfortable as an enterprise sharing our user data into another environment, right? So obviously, again, caveat, I have a horse in this race, right? InfoSum is all about keeping your data, in your environment. But you do have to ask the question, with all the scrutiny and what's been happening as a result of privacy with ATT and Chrome and all this other stuff, ask yourself that sort of like critical question of, do we think that we should continue to be expressing our data into the ecosystem? And if so, there's a whole host of alternatives, and then you start asking those questions that Deborah had just mentioned. I think if not, then you have to sort of say, okay, what are the alternatives? Obviously, call me. But there are some fundamental questions here where I go back to some of the statements we made earlier, just about like, this is your moment, right? If you really want to regain that control and that strategic seat at the table with your brands, you need to have control of what's going on with your data. And so I think that question is also really critical to this path ahead. And that needs to be answered kind of before we dive too deeply into strategies with vendors, et cetera, et cetera.
I would say to Tripp's point, Jonathan, like, yes, publishers, if you do not have a data strategy, start there. It doesn't need to be big or robust, just something where you kind of outline what you will and won't do. Have a data governance program, even kind of a light program that outlines, will I share this data? How will I share this data? What are the rules that we're comfortable with as a publisher? What is our agreement with our users to do that? You know, it's basically kind of your values as a publisher and your relationship with your users as well. That's incredibly important. And then the other thing with the vendors is that, you know, having spoken to, I don't know how many at this point, 50 plus, I feel like in the last 2 years, there's some, like I mentioned before, that are very interested in working with you, but it's only to persist the way it's been, which is to continue to take your data as a publisher and monetize it, you know, 10 different ways for themselves. And again, this is that time as a publisher, and especially the smaller, medium-sized ones that are probably feeling a little bit helpless maybe right now. There are providers like on this call and others. Our data platform actually is going to be offered off to publishers. We will help them, usher them into the cookieless world on our platform as well. There's a new concept, I think I mentioned this to Jonathan, of private gardens instead of walled gardens. And private gardens are things such as publisher alliances, you know, like the Ozone Alliance, which is over in England. Those types of things, I think, are good strategies as well for publishers to kind of band together and, you know, strengthen numbers, really.
I'm going to step in as a panelist for 1 second. You know, I've built 3 ad tech companies, and I've worked with countless publishers. And in addition to what everyone has said, I would ask that every publisher, when they're talking to a vendor, understand how the vendor makes money. That it's too easy to say, oh, it's a percentage of the media, that's what happens. This solves a problem for me, and I'm going to do that. Understand where they're making their money and understand how they're capturing value out of the relationship with you. To your point, you know, Nathan, some of them are still trying to focus on charging monopoly rents on your data. They are providing a service. They need to be compensated. They should be compensated fairly, but you need to understand where that value exchange is occurring. And it's too easy to say yes to someone that says, oh, I'm going to give you, you know, 10% more of something, not realizing what else they're getting out of the deal.
Yeah, nothing's ever free. Let's just remember, if it's free, you're the product, right?
Very good.
And I
go ahead.
Just wanted to add one more thing that we're seeing as we're dealing with agencies are trying to figure out this world. And we're seeing a lot of different things happening, from the just insertion order terms and conditions, and kind of how they're trying to now ask to drop a pixel with their media, pass it through. Is that okay? We want to use it for other things too, kind of thing. I would say to those publishers, be very careful about giving that away to them. And it's very intentional on their part. But the other thing, if you don't have a legal team, you know, you're not big enough to have one. One of the things that we have discovered is you could be dangerously close to becoming a data controller instead of a data provider, and that puts you in a whole nother bucket of risk that you have to be very careful of, frankly.
Oh, that's data controller versus data provider is probably a topic for another webinar another day, because it has a lot of interesting implications in terms of what you can and can't do and how you can make money. But we're just about out of time. I'm going to ask just to kind of go around the horn quickly with everyone and ask kind of 2 questions. One, any final thoughts? And second, kind of as you look into January 1st, 2020, no more third-party cookie. What's the one prediction that you have that kind of is ringing around in your mind? And I'll start with you, Amanda, please.
I'd say my prediction is that it's not going to be doom and gloom. It's not going to be as bad as everyone's been forecasting, because everyone's been educating themselves and figuring out a strategy and getting prepared for this. And I would just say, you know, when you're talking to partners, talk to someone that's going to help you today. Ask them for references of who they're working with. And if they can't provide them, that's a red flag. And then, you know, ask them how they're going to help you in the future. How are they going to future-proof your business and help you, and how are they going to iterate on their product in the future? Because this is, you know, when the deadline happens, that's when it really starts. So that's all.
Trip?
It's going to come faster than we think. That's just the way it works. And I think that when we get through it, it's going to be a better time for anyone who's a media owner, and actually brands as well. I think we're going to be laying the foundation for a brighter future and a more profitable future. It's going to be awkward getting there, but we're going to get there, and it's going to be a better place in the end.
Great. Deborah?
I agree with Amanda. It's not doom and gloom, and I agree with Trip. It's a great opportunity for media owners who are prepared, because if you're not prepared, it is going to be doom and gloom. You can't just wait and see, because when the hammer falls and the axe falls, you better hope that you're prepared. And if the more prepared you are, the bigger of an opportunity it is for you. So get there, get ready, and take advantage of being a first mover in the wake.
And Nathan?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think my prediction is that Google and Facebook will get even more money than they're already getting come January and February, unfortunately, for the publishing world. And my other prediction is that the 1%, when I call them 1% of the media out there, which is the big ones everybody knows about, New York Times, Washington Post, they're going to be fine. But to Deborah's point, the small publishers, they're going to see dollars turn into dimes, unfortunately. And I hope that they're able to survive that first initial wave or hit. But hopefully they find solutions and learned enough on this call and can reach out to some of us to help them get there. But that's my prediction.
Well, thank you all. This has been really informative. I encourage anyone who has additional questions that we're happy to answer them after the fact through email. Deborah, I'm going to give you a chance to sign us off, but I appreciate everyone's time and participation. And again, thank you all, and thank all the the participants who joined us today. And I believe this is available online as well, Deborah?
Yep.
Okay, so thank you. And Deborah, any parting words?
Well, I just want to thank all of you for being here. I mean, it's especially a busy time for those who are preparing and helping others prepare. So I really do appreciate your time and your transparency. And I love having these conversations, especially in our world where it's hard to have them at conferences and things like that. So I think these conversations are really important. Jonathan, thank you so much for moderating and helping us to pull together the agenda and keeping it flowing. And to the point of keeping the conversation going, this is the second in our cookie crumbling series, and we will have more. We have ideas about future agendas, but please share any ideas that you would like us to talk about, issues you'd like us to cover. And we will be in touch with a follow-up. You'll have a recorded video and it'll be available online on YouTube. And we will be back in touch with more information about our next webinar as we are getting more prepared for that. Thank you all of you who joined us and asked questions and listened. Thank you for joining us today as well.